Hello everyone, this is Dr. Stevens with a lecture on subject and theme, and we'll be talking about subject and theme as the basis for interpretation of a short story. We're going to do this by looking at James Joyce's story Araby as an example, but let me begin by talking about what I mean by the basis of interpretation. Interpretation, very loosely speaking, deals with the meaning of a work of literature. We interpret it to try to say what we think that it means. In order to interpret, we need to be sure that we understand the actual content of the work itself, meaning what is its form, how is it put together, and certainly what its subject is. What is it about? And then its theme. What particular approach to the subject does it take? What view of the subject does it take? What does it seem to be saying about the subject? So that's why we say this is the basis for interpretation, subject and theme. Now, this is not the only thing that we need to note about a work of literature, or in this case in particular about a short story, but this is one of the most important things. There are some other things that we note which are important, and by the way, all of these elements, what I'm saying, what the story, what the work of literature is made up of, they are all related to each other. Form, content, subject, theme, and so on. Let's begin by just looking at some of the other elements here that I'm talking about in addition to subject and theme. Story begins by identifying a setting, doesn't it? North Richmond Street. Now, we don't know where North Richmond Street is unless we actually are reading this story in the context of the book in which it was originally published. And it's a book by James Joyce called Dubliners. And so we know from that context that all of these stories, including Araby, are set in the Irish city of Dublin. But we begin by noting the setting. Okay, that is one of the elements, as you know, of a short story. And by the way, remember that all of these elements, what I'm calling the content, what the story is made up of, they are all related to the act of interpreting. So we've got setting. In the second paragraph here, we have the identification of a narrator. Now, let's see. The former tenant of our house. Our is first person, isn't it? Okay? Refers to the I, the me, the we. Here we have among these, okay, among the papers and so on found in this room, I found a few paper-covered books, right? And here we have, I liked the last best because its leaves were yellow. So we identify the narrator. Now, we haven't identified the narrator completely, right? But we at least know that the narrator is speaking in the first person. So somebody who is in the story, some character in the story is telling us the story in the first person. And as we go along, we learn more about this narrator, don't we? And it's especially important that we know some basic things about him, right? So when the short days, and I'm reading here at the beginning of this paragraph, when the short days of winter came, dusk fell before we had well eaten our dinners. When we met in the street, the houses had grown somber. The space of sky above us was the color of ever-changing violet, and toward it the lamps of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played till our bodies glowed. Oh, they played, and the career, that is the course of our play, brought us through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses, where we ran the gauntlet of the rough tribes from the cottages, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, you're starting to get an idea from these details, such as if my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid. You are starting to get the idea from these details that we're talking about young boys, right? They are outside after dinner. They are playing. Okay, so the narrator belongs to this category of people, these young boys. So we say, oh, okay, well, the narrator probably is a young boy. This is important. Important to identify who the narrator is. The story is being told then from his point of view, and we still haven't identified the subject, but we know that it's the point of view of a young boy. How young, how old, we don't yet quite know, but we're going to find out. All right? If my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid in the shadow until we had seen him safely housed. Now, up to this point, all right, from the beginning up to this point, we have various things that we could say might be the subject of the poem, but remember that you don't want to try to identify the subject too early. You need more information. So you're going to read along until you see something that seems to be emphasized, some particular idea or some particular subject, I suppose I should say. You're going to wait until something seems to get a particular emphasis. So we're going to say that up to this point, and you'll see why I'm identifying this as the point in a minute, but up to this point, we're talking about exposition. Okay, what is the background to this story? What is the basic information we need to set the context, information such as the setting and who the narrator is? Now, we start with that thing that we call the rising action. We're starting here. This is still part of the exposition, but it's getting into the rising action pretty quickly. So what is it then that I'm talking about? Mangan's sister. If Mangan's sister came out on the doorstep to call her brother to his tea, we watched her from the shadow peer up and down the street. Okay, we've got an uncle, we've got a sister. All right, so we don't know that the uncle or the sister is necessarily the subject yet, but we're going to find out, right? We waited to see whether she would remain or go in, and if she remained, we left our shadow. Okay, remember they were hiding in the shadows. We walked up to Mangan's steps. Mangan is one of the boys, right? She was waiting for us, her figure defined by the light from the half-opened door. Her brother always teased her before he obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung as she moved her body, and the soft rope of her hair tossed from side to side. Okay? Now, we're moving from exposition into rising action, but we first of all have to, I suppose you could say, as part of the exposition, we have to identify the Mangan's sister as one of the main focal points of the story. Now, here is the key detail. Every morning I lay on the floor in the front parlor watching her door. Not Mangan's door, all right? Mangan's one of the boys, right? But her door, well, Mangan lives there. Why isn't it Mangan's door? Why? Because focus is on the sister, right? So now we are starting to get some sense of what the subject is. And it's not just the sister, because what have we already seen? Important details about what the narrator sees. The narrator notices her figure, the figure of this girl, defined by the light. Okay? The dress, he notices the dress. He notices the soft rope of her hair tossing from side to side. This is what the boy notices, right? Well, come on. Boys of 5, 6, 7 years old wouldn't be caught dead noticing these kinds of details about a girl. A girl? Boys are not interested in girls until they get to a certain age, right? So we know that this boy is old enough to be interested in girls, interested to the point that he notices the figure of a girl. He notices the dress that the girl is wearing. He notices those things which are made up of male attraction to the female, right? Okay, so the focus is on the sister and the narrators, and I'm just going to put N apostrophe S there, the narrators' thoughts about her, right? His interest in her, the narrator's interest, right? So we see, as we move through, and we're just about through the first page or so of the story, as we move through, we start to notice what seems to be the focus. What gets the most emphasis? What is getting the most attention in the story? So by the time we have gotten into this paragraph, let's see, I'm going to go back up a little bit here. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped, an emotional reaction to Mangan's sister, right? Ran to the hall, seized my books, I followed her. Okay, he looks at her. Okay, it seems like, a little bit of stalking here, a little bit of voyeurism perhaps. That would be one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it would be that, he's still a young boy. Early adolescence, perhaps. He's into puberty, certainly, by this point, given his interest, the kind of interest he has in Mangan's sister and so on. I wouldn't say that he's stalking. I wouldn't even say that he's a voyeur. I would say that he's bashful. And we find that this is confirmed later on in the story, that he's bashful. He's afraid to confront her directly, but he's still interested in her, so he follows her. And he says, I had never spoken to her except for a few casual words, yet her name, and by the way, she is never named, I don't think anyway, hope I'm not wrong about that. Her name was like a summons to all my foolish blood. All right, so things are getting pretty clear here, right? And we're at the end of the first page. Okay. We continue. Her image accompanied me in places the most hostile to romance. He's mentioning romance. Okay, we can tell that there is a romantic interest, right? So even in places like the market, and buying stuff and carrying parcels for my aunt and so on, even there, or among drunken men and so on, that is, in places and in company that seem not to be encouraging any kind of romantic thoughts, even there, Her image accompanied him. He thought about her. All right? So at this point, I'm going to say, aha, we know the subject. The subject is the boy, and we don't know his name either. The boy's interest, and it's romantic. Romantic interest in, we're just going to call sister, right? Mangan's sister. So that's the subject. Now, so we've got romance, young romance. There are lots of different ways we can identify this subject, and the more ways we use, the deeper we get into the subject. Okay, so we say young romance. But romance implies something reciprocal, right? Some kind of relationship between two people. Okay? But this boy doesn't really have a romantic relationship with the girl, does he? So, we need to get into this. What is the nature of his relationship? Let's look at it here. Her name sprang to my lips in strange prayers and praises, which I didn't understand. All right? Eyes were often full of tears. He didn't understand. If I spoke to her, I thought little of the future, right? I did not know whether I would ever speak to her or not, or if I spoke to her, if I did, how I would tell her of my confused adoration. All right. So, we're learning more about the subject. How a young boy deals with, okay, feelings of love and desire, right? Because when we notice what a young woman is wearing, okay, when we notice her hair, when we notice her figure and so on, the suggestion is that we're talking about young desire, adolescent desire for a girl, right? Okay, so subject. The subject is the narrator's feelings for, relationship with, especially feelings, romantic feelings toward a young girl. Okay, now, that's all kind of background, right? What's the action? What happens in the story? Here it is. What's happened previously is the context of his feelings, right? Now we get into the action. At last she spoke to me. Before this point, okay, the action has been all general. Generalized action, what we would do. Okay? Here the action becomes specific. Okay? From this point on, the action becomes specific. At last she spoke to me. Not the general past that we have seen, okay, in what we used to do in the evenings, in general, as we would go out and play after dinner, right? Now we've got a specific time in the past, and it's the time when she spoke to me. When she addressed the first words to me, I was so confused that I did not know what to answer. Why? Because he's bashful. This guy is not a ladies' man. He's not somebody who knows how to put a line on a young woman, right? Okay? He's confused. She asked me, right? She says, I'm so confused that I did not know what to answer. She asked me, was I going to Araby? Oh, that's what the title was all about. It would be a splendid bazaar, like a fair. Okay? Araby then, okay, we know, okay, the title is the name of this bazaar, and it becomes then the focal point of the boy's relationship with Mangan's sister. She would love to go. He finally speaks to her. And why can't you? I asked. Okay, notice again. While she spoke, she turned a silver bracelet round and round her wrist. He's looking at her. He notices these details, right? This is all part of his attraction to and his relationship with Mangan's sister. She could not go because there was a retreat at her convent and so on. And what does he say? She says, it's well for you. She seems to be assuming at this point. Oh, he forgot whether he answered yes or no, but she seems to assume that he is going, and this is a crucial detail. He says, if I go, I said, I will bring you something. A very, very small detail, but symbolically very important, because what is he doing? He is making a commitment. Okay, this promise that he will bring something, all right, symbolizes his devotion to her. She doesn't yet know. She doesn't even know that he's in love with her, right? He's got a crush on her, and to her, he is probably just one of the other boys in the neighborhood. She certainly knows who he is. He's a friend of her brother and so on, right? But so to her, this is not some kind of conscious commitment. It probably doesn't mean a great deal to her, but it means a great deal to him. This is his symbolic vow of devotion, if you will, even his commitment to his feelings of love for her. Now we're going to skip over what happens next. Obviously, he's going to be thinking about her, fantasizing about going to the bazaar, buying her something, and so on. He makes arrangements to go to the bazaar. He gets permission from his uncle with whom he lives. His uncle is going to give him money to go to the bazaar, but then the uncle forgets. And on the day that he's supposed to go to the bazaar, it's very, very late by the time the uncle shows up, right? And finally, the uncle gives him the money to go to the bazaar and so on. All right, and we're skipping all of the details of this build-up to the bazaar, right? But this is going to be the climax. When he goes to the bazaar, and obviously what he wants to do at the bazaar is buy something for Mangan's sister. So what happens? All right, so his aunt intervenes. Okay? Uncle says, people are in their bed, they're after their first sleep. It's too late for you to go to the bazaar, the uncle is saying. Okay, he did not smile. He's not very happy. My aunt said to him energetically, can't you give him the money and let him go? You've kept him late enough as it is. So he does. Now, this story, James Joyce was a master storyteller, and it is full of details, and they are all significant. We don't have time to look at all of the details. I mean, holding the florin would be a coin, right? And I don't know a lot about the old Irish monetary system, but it would be a coin worth a fair amount. Okay, so he's holding it tightly. Well, that little detail in itself, holding it tightly, it symbolizes and expresses, if you will, the tension that he feels, the importance of going to this fair and so on, the bazaar. Okay, so we're going to look at the end, because now we're looking for the theme. All right, so he's in the bazaar. He goes into the bazaar, he's looking around, and we'll pick it up here. Remembering with difficulty why I had come. Interesting detail. Why is he having trouble remembering why he had come? He went over to one of the stalls, examined the porcelain vases, right? He's looking for things to buy. Okay, he goes over to stalls where people are selling things. At the door of the stall, a young lady was talking. Okay, we get a bit of their conversation. And then the young lady who's managing the stall, she's the clerk, we would say, probably, observing me, the young lady came over and asked me, did I wish to buy anything? Okay? And what does he say? He blows it, right? Instead of buying something for Mangan's sister, he is just losing his sense of purpose. He says, no, thank you. Okay? No, thank you. So is that the theme? Okay? Where the subject is young love, we'll say in general, this boy's fascination for and attraction to Mangan's sister. That's the subject. Okay, is the theme, okay, loss of purpose? Well, something's happening here. Things are collapsing for him. He does not know how to fulfill this relationship. Buying something for Mangan's sister would be a way of pursuing the relationship, right? And when it comes to the point of actually doing something about it, of being able to do something about it, he seems to lose his nerve, doesn't he? Okay, is that the theme? I don't think so. Not for me, okay? So, he has an opportunity to buy something. He doesn't buy something, okay? And so the clerk, the young lady, goes back to the two young men. Okay, they're probably flirting, right? Then he says, and this is the crucial moment. I lingered before her stall, though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem the more real. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by having her think that he wasn't really serious about anything, okay? Then I turned away slowly and walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6pence in my pocket, an important detail, all right, because the money is coming to nothing. It's just rattling around in his pocket. All right, so the literal detail of the pennies falling against the 6pence in his pocket symbolizes the futility of his expedition. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The bazaar is closing, right? The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. The bazaar has closed. The boy is in darkness. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and anger. We need to interpret this because we don't know exactly, because the story doesn't tell us explicitly why he feels this anger and anguish. Vanity in this particular context means futility. Doesn't mean he's conceited, doesn't mean he's vain and stuck up, not in that sense. But vanity in the biblical sense, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, saith the preacher in Ecclesiastes, and so on, meaning things have come to nothing. All right? So, He has had a purpose. He's going to go to the bar. He is going to pursue his relationship with Mangan's sister by buying her something. He is going to bring that relationship to some kind of fulfillment, but he loses his nerve, his sense of purpose, and we are left then saying, okay, what is the theme? Again, I say I don't think it's loss of sense of purpose. But notice, and here's the important thing. This is where, whoops, how did that happen? This is where interpretation begins. Interpretation begins. We have the details. We know what the subject is. We know what the boy was trying to do. When we get to the theme, we say, okay, the theme then, we could say the theme is young love, the theme is the difficulty of young love. All of these things can be identified as the theme. Once we start getting into all the possible themes, we are then sort of at the beginning of interpretation, right? So, theme. And I'm just going to conclude. Folks, by suggesting things. Okay? Theme. Yeah. Let's go back and get my pen. Certainly there are many possible themes. There are certainly things that we can say couldn't possibly be themes, but possible themes, there's more than one, okay? We can say, we can take the language directly from the conclusion of the poem and we can say, vanity and futility comes to nothing. Futility, right? Of adolescent love. That gives us then a basis. That's not a complete interpretation, right? Okay? We say the subject is young love. We say, okay, theme then. What is the story telling us about the young love? Well, it's exploring then this particular theme. The difficulty of being a young boy, finding himself in love for the first time, and not knowing what to do about it. How is he going to pursue something that he finds extremely elusive, right? This relationship with Mangan's sister herself, all very, very elusive. He can't get a hold of them, and we see that. He can't get a hold of her, he can't get a hold of the relationship, and we see this when he finally gets to the bazaar. The bazaar is closing, and he loses his nerve. He can't buy anything for her, and he ends up feeling complete failure. He ends up feeling driven and derided by vanity. He is being made fun of, not being made fun of explicitly by Mangan's sister. Again, she's in the background. Whatever she is thinking, whatever she is feeling is very much in the background. But for him, he ends up failing of his purpose, feeling made fun of by the vanity of what he is trying to do. It's not going to come to anything. So, love then is elusive. Once we can identify, as I say, there are different possible themes. I'm offering you one that I think is directly connected with the language at the end of the story. Once we have a theme, then we can say, okay, I'm going to explore the way this story develops that theme, and that's going to give me some kind of interpretation of what the story means. Okay, now, I haven't tried to give you a full interpretation of the story here. There isn't time for that. The purpose was simply to give you an idea of how you can talk about subject and theme, how you can identify the subject, how you can identify the theme, so that you can then have a starting point, sort of a basis for going on to interpret the story. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to reading what you have to say in the discussion forum.